it is 10 o'clock. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on electric vehicle charging station funding opportunities for GAP communities. My name is Soraya Deeby. I'm a senior air quality planner with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. This webinar today is being hosted by the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which also houses the DFW Clean Cities coalitions. We do ask that all attendees today please mute yourselves and turn off your video during today's presentations. We do ask that we have only our presenters show their video during the presentations in order to avoid any kind of disruptions. Please also mute yourselves now. Participants will be asked to type their questions during the presentations into the chat box. Following each presenter, I will ask them these questions. At the end of today's webinar, we've allocated time for some open Q&A discussion where all attendees will be able to unmute themselves and turn on their video to have more of a roundtable dialogue. So as we can see from today's webinar agenda, we've got a great list of speakers, starting with Bethany Ross with the North Central Texas Council of Government, who will speak on what is NCT-COG as well as DFW Clean Cities, and give an overview of what is electric vehicle infrastructure. Next, we would have Buzz Smith, the EV-Angelist, speak on electric vehicle infrastructure and how it can be used as a destination point. We also have Nate Hickman with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, who will be speaking on funding opportunities for charging infrastructure in Texas, followed by Diane Turchetta with the Federal Highway Administration, as well as Rob Hyman with the U.S. Department of Transportation. And again, as mentioned, we will have time for, at the end of today's presentation, for open Q&A. So moving forward, we'll now have our first speaker, Bethany Ross.
Thank you, Soraya. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Bethany Ross. I'm an air quality planner for the North Central Texas Council of Governments and Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. I wanted to give a quick introduction on electric vehicle charging infrastructure before we dive into some funding opportunities from our later presenters. So next slide. So just to give some brief background on who we are, the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or NCT-COG, is the regional planning agency, the metropolitan planning organization, and the host agency for DFW Clean Cities Coalition. The National Clean Cities program was created by the Department of Energy in 1993 to address the requirements of the energy policy of 1992. We are part of a national network of over 100 coalitions that works to advance the nation's economic, environmental, and energy security by promoting affordable domestic transportation fuels and technologies. Since mobile sources contribute to about 2/3 of air pollutants causing ozone formation in the region, our main focus is improving air quality within the transportation sector, which we do through promoting alternative fuels, low-emitting vehicles, or electric vehicles, commonly known as EVs. Next slide. Now, over the years, we have seen a steady increase in electric vehicle adoption in Texas. And as these numbers increase, an increase in demand for electric vehicle charging infrastructure will also become apparent. We do keep track of vehicle registration in Texas, and you can find all of this information at dfwcleancities.org/EVNT. Next slide. Now, over the years, we have seen, now EV adoption is growing every year, not only in the US, but also in other countries. There are several projections here on this slide. Up to 55% of vehicles are projected to be electric by the year 2040. To plan for this EV majority, we must implement strategies now to build out infrastructure. Since right now, the global composition is less than 1%, as you can see on this graph. This means that we have a long way to go in a short amount of time. And from a business perspective, this is a huge opportunity to take advantage of these new and upcoming technologies. Next slide. We also keep a close watch on where vehicles are registered in comparison to where the infrastructure is, as you can see in this map. Currently, there's a strong correlation between locations of chargers and the homes of EVs. We have also seen that EV adoption and charger placement tends to align with higher income demographics, which is something we are actively trying to address through more focused conversations with our member governments, and one of the reasons why this webinar is so important. One thing to note, there are very few counties with 0 EVs, the counties depicted here in white. So the likelihood of an EV registered in your area is very high. Having infrastructure to satisfy the demand these EV drivers bring is very important to the development and widespread adoption of EVs. Next slide. So as you can see in this slide, there are 3 types of chargers, level 1, level 2, and DC fast charge. Level 1 is best suited for extended stays as it can give only a couple of miles of range per hour of charge, whereas level 2 and DC fast chargers are more commonly used for public charging. Due to installation costs, generally public chargers are significantly more expensive, which is why we've asked the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the Federal Highway Administration to discuss state and federal funding opportunities for these types of chargers later on in the presentations. Next slide. Based on the levels of charging, applications may be different. For example, since level 1 chargers are relatively slow to its counterparts, these chargers are mostly used at home. This includes both single-family garages and driveways, as well as multi-unit dwellings and like apartment complexes or duplexes. Generally, at an average workplace, cars are sitting for at least 8 hours. Therefore, level 1 or level 2 can be applicable. As mentioned earlier, public chargers are generally level 2 or DC fast chargers to allow for speedy charging in parking lots, municipalities, hotels, and leisure destinations. As you want to add a station, it's important to think about what type of charger you want based on the location and potential customers. Next slide. So here are some of the benefits EV charging can bring to properties. A huge benefit of installing EV charging stations is boosting economic activity in your community, as EV owners may dine, shop, or explore the town as they wait for their vehicle to charge. EV charging can also contribute to points to building certifications like LEED, which may reduce your insurance rates. The availability of EV chargers also shows public commitment to environment and air quality. Next slide. As seen in this map, EV drivers in the areas with high EV adoption, the dark red, would like to travel along interstates to connect them to neighboring metropolitan areas and states. With DC fast charging, this makes road trips possible for EV drivers. Since 2016, the Federal Highway Administration has set up alternative fuel corridors that signify that the highway can be safely and reliably used by alternative fuels. As we can see in this graphic, the Interstate Highway 35 going towards Austin is ready for reliable DC fast charging to provide quick charging for EV drivers along this corridor. Now, another great benefit of DC fast charging is that it can be a potential economic boost and a public destination for your town. And so we'll actually hear more about EV charging for travelers from our next presenter, Buzz. Thank you.
All right, thank you. As Bethany mentioned, our next presenter is Buzz Smith. And correct me, is it EV-Angelist, sir?
EV-Angelist, that is correct.
EV-Angelist, great. And he'll be presenting. Thank you.
Okay, you seeing my slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So basically my pitch here, guys, is going to be that EV charging is an opportunity for you, especially if you're a smaller town along a major highway. And as Arthur C. Clarke once said, you know, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. A lot of people, you know, they just don't know enough about EVs yet, so they're thinking that they are pretty much magic, but they're not. They're just a new technology, and all new technologies have adoption curves. And you may not realize this, but modern electric vehicles, and I'm talking about starting with the original Tesla Roadster, are now 13 years old. So adoption's been coming a long way. And you may have noticed in Bethany's graph that the adoption rate is starting to accelerate. And that all technologies do that. In the beginning, there are those early adopters that are willing to try something new. And we've seen that here, but now we're getting into this technology adoption S-curve into the green area where there's going to be sudden rapid adoption. And last year, the EV market grew twice as fast as the rest of the automotive market on a percentage base. So right now, the industry is moving into the green zone. A lot of people are saying EVs will be, 50% of all cars by 2040. And you might be thinking, well, why even think about that today? Well, guess what? It's going to happen soon. It's going to happen sooner than most of the experts are telling you, and it's going to happen fast. And as an example, here we've got New York City on Easter morning, 1900 on the left picture, and it's all horses and buggies. 3 years later, Easter morning, 1913, you cannot see a horse and buggy. Now, this is a major city. So just like we're seeing with EV adoption, it will happen in the major cities first, but it will head out to other areas. I have a rancher in Merkel, Texas, who bought an electric vehicle from me back when I used to sell vehicles. And they drive 100 miles a day in their usual route, and they're in love with their electric vehicle now. So it's coming to smaller cities. Now, seriously, can things really change that quickly? Well, remember what smartphones looked like before the Apple iPhone was introduced. Just 3 years later, everybody's form factor became these flat touch screens. That is very common, and it's gonna happen with electric vehicles as well. Now, the original Prius was the gold standard for new vehicle technology adoption. Everywhere you look today, you see Priuses, and it's not that big a thing. And here we're looking at a graph of mostly electric vehicles, but that black curve that suddenly takes off like a rocket was the adoption of the original Prius. And it went along just like all the other cars until about the 43rd month, and then something changed and this adoption rate went way up. And what changed was the price of gasoline went up. In this case, with electric vehicles, we're already seeing Model 3 adoption has blown away the original Prius adoption rate. And even before they went into production, they had 400,000 units reserved. Well, guess what? Tesla's Cybertruck already has 1.25 million reservations. Rivian already has 30,000 reservations for the R1T pickup and R1S full-sized SUV. And already, even though they haven't gone into production yet, they're looking for a location for their second factory, and Texas is on their short list. By the way, the Cybertruck, in case you don't know, is going to be made in a factory in Austin, Texas. So Texas is going to become the center of pickup truck, electric pickup truck manufacturing. Now, I mentioned pickup trucks. You might be thinking, well, who's going to make an electric pickup truck? Maybe you saw the Ford announcement or the General Motors GMC Hummer announcement, but here are some other companies. And some of these you've never heard of before. They're brand new companies that are coming out. And notice the Tesla picture at the bottom, the Rivian picture at the bottom, the Bollinger Motor picture. These are not econo-boxes. These vehicles are being marketed as adventure vehicles to get out in the wild and have some fun. And that's what's going to happen. And that's what's going to bring them to your towns. Now, as we saw earlier, Texas has a fair amount of chargers already, and people can do cross-country driving through Texas. The gold chargers in this picture are DC fast chargers. The green ones are the slower level 2 chargers. But along highways, when you're on a road trip, you're going to be looking for those gold ones. And so we can see a lot of areas like driving from, say, Dallas, Fort Worth to Colorado, you're going to want more chargers along that route. So I just kind of looked around Texas and I saw that from Dallas, Fort Worth to Shreveport, Louisiana, there are no DC fast chargers except for one that's at an actual car dealership for their service department. And I thought, well, you know, we probably need one right in the middle, say right around Tyler. And I started thinking about the development of towns. And in the 19th century, it was very important for towns to have the railroad come through. In fact, that made sure that your town was going to stay on the map and was going to grow and prosper. And in fact, the city of Houston's city logo even has a locomotive right in the middle of it, because it was a big deal for Houston to have a port and the train stations. In the 20th century, this changed. Railroads were still important, but interstate highways became very important. And when Route 66 was being redesigned, towns went to bat to hang on to that freeway to make sure that it continued through their town. Well, guess what? In the 21st century, it's going to be EV charging infrastructure. That's going to dictate which towns people go to. And the great news is, and stop for a while. And when I say that, charging takes on a DC fast charger, if you want to fill that battery up, anywhere from say 30 minutes to 2 hours. So that's an opportunity for your restaurants, for instance, to have people stop for a meal, and drivers will want to do that. They're not going to sit there in the car and wait to charge. They're going to want to find something to occupy their time. If you've got local attractions, it would be great to make sure you advertise those near where you put the chargers. If you've got a great shopping district, make sure that you've got a way for people to easily get to the shopping district. Level 2 charging is really considered overnight charging. You're not going to stop and charge for 4, 5 to 9 hours in the middle of a drive, but you will select hotels in the future that have overnight level 2 charging. So hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, Airbnbs, that will be very important. Rest stops along the freeway where somebody might stop and actually pitch a tent for a little bit. Then NEMA 50, a lot of people don't think about this, but NEMA 50 is just the plug, like say your dryer would plug into. A lot of people have portable chargers they can take with them on the road that are level 2. And so campgrounds that have these outlets currently being used by large RVs and trailers, well, guess what? A NEMA 50 can be used by an electric vehicle so that they can stop and camp at your place. Again, a rest stop might be a great place to have a NEMA 50 charger. Now, chargers, you might thinking, oh, we got to have a super grid, going to that location. That's not necessarily true. DC fast charging can require pretty strong electric infrastructure, but there are companies, in this case on the left-hand picture there, that will have battery backup in their chargers. So what that means is it's pulling the electricity from the grid at a much lower rate, so you don't have to build out so much infrastructure at first, and it's putting it into that big battery pack you see at the bottom of the charger. When a car comes in, it then charges that car at DC fast charging speeds. So you're effectively getting DC fast charging to the car without the infrastructure cost of having a major electrical service line coming to that location. In case your town doesn't have that currently, there is an option. Now, later in the future, when the grid, gets to your town with more power, you can always upgrade to another charger. I mentioned earlier the attractions in your town that it'll be important that people find out about. In the upper right-hand corner, you've got what's called a Volta charger with a very large LCD display. And so it could actually be showing what movies are showing in the theaters in your town, what the shopping district's like, what important attractions you have in that town that people can go to see. Now, all these chargers, you saw pricing earlier that might look cost prohibitive, but down at the bottom right there, we've got a charger installed at a hotel that'll service 2 cars and is relatively inexpensive to charge. It is a much slower charger. It's a level 2 charger, but if you're going to be asleep in the hotel, who cares? Let the car charge overnight while you sleep. And already EV drivers are planning their routes based on where the hotels are that have level 2 charging, or at least level 2 charging. And so you can think of it this way: during the day when you're in your drive, you want to stop at a DC fast charger. But when you're selecting a hotel you want to stay at night, you can charge at a much lower cost level 2 charger, much lower cost for the hotel to install, and it still serves your purposes. Now, my wife and I recently took a trip to Enchanted Rock, and it's kind of a desert out by Enchanted Rock as far as EV charging, but like all EV drivers, we were planning our trip ahead of time, and about 40 miles away from our campground was a little town that was, well, not really a little town, but they had at their visitor center in Kerrville, Texas, a DC fast charger. And so you get out of your car, you plug it in, you walk into the visitor center, there is a wall of brochures about all the things in that town you can do. Right across the street, there was a restaurant. So great. We could walk right across the street and have a meal while our car is charging. And in the bottom right picture, you can see that these aren't econo boxes. These are cars that people are going to take on vacations. And already EV drivers are showing how much they can store inside their car. People are saying, I didn't really need a pickup. This thing does everything I need. And in this case, we had a kayak strapped on the roof, 2 bicycles hanging off the back, and literally that car was packed with camping gear for a great little vacation. So what's going to be happening in the very near future, not 2040, is people are going to load up. They're going to get their camping gear. They're tired of COVID. They want to hit the road and they want to come to your town, but they need to know that they can charge once they get there. So make sure that you're putting in the infrastructure that will help these people have their adventure and have it in your town.
Thank you, Buzz. And I don't see any questions in the chat box yet.
Well, in that case, I'll talk about this because there's, this is Kerrville. They had a great park with bicycle trails. This is Enchanted Rock. We did camping there. But what we found was charging is not the same paradigm as filling your car with gasoline. Yes, it takes a little longer, but also in the past, because gasoline refueling is so fast, we always think, got to get to that destination, got to get to that destination. And like the old saying says, life is a journey. It's not just getting to the destination, which is the end of your life. And what my wife and I discovered is there are so many cool things to see in Texas if you just slow down a little bit and enjoy the journey. And so we did kayaking, we did bicycling, we did hiking, and stopped for meals during these charging times. And so nestled into that drive was a charging time that was, yes, longer than it took to fill a gasoline car, but we ended up taking that time and actually enjoying it by finding all these small towns that had cool things for this to do. So EVs are not the cars of the future. They're the cars of right now. And right now is the time to get prepared.
Thank you. I did receive a question regarding the cost screen again. Can we share this cost screen again? Was that a question, Todd, in relation to the cost of the chargers that Bethany had presented? Let's see. And I'll go ahead and take over. I think, was this the slide that the person was requesting, showing the cost differences? Great. Okay, so this was the slide. Yes, so as Buzz mentioned in his presentation, there is kind of this time and place for the different charging station types. And some of that comes down to the cost of the stations. And as he mentioned, places like hotels where they may be staying longer overnight, it would make sense to have a level 2 charger.
And Soraya, if I could jump in here for just a moment. Attendees may notice there's a very wide range of costs on these slides for both the level 2 and the DC fast chargers. And that is not really anything to do with the equipment. The equipment is relatively standard, but site-specific elements can vary a lot. So if you're looking to install a charger on a corner of your property that's very far away from electrical access, where there may be a need to run conduit and do some trenching and things like that through an existing parking lot, that's going to be a lot more expensive than if you install a charger on the side of a building close to the existing electrical access. And if there's any utility upgrades needed in terms of the capacity that you already have at the site where you're wanting to add a charger. So that's why there's such a big range. We really recommend, and we'll talk about this more later, but just if you're interested in this at all, getting in contact with your utility very early so that you can start having those conversations about what is my access. And I know we have a representative from Encore on today. They handle transmission distribution in most of the area that we work in here in North Texas. But I know there's some people from other parts of the state. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I just wanted to call out that range is really a function of installation and construction, which is really something that's site specific.
Thank you. I did also see a question regarding cities giving grants for charging stations.
Way to our next speakers.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think that actually leads a good segue into our next speaker, who is Nate Hickman with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. Thank you, Nate, for joining us. And I will let you share your screen to talk today about some of the funding opportunities through TCEQ.
Hey, and thank you so much. Hoping that everyone can hear me well. If not, just feel free to chime in and ask me to speak up. Are we good?
Perfectly, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me here today. And I'm very glad to be able to represent the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality here. Some of you I'm familiar with as I'm looking through the names out here, and some of you it's the first time. So very happy to be able to present to many of y'all. I'm going to leave it on this screen for a short period before I move over to kind of our web pages and just catch y'all all up to speed to kind of where we are with the commission right now and what's coming very soon. So this particular group meeting is really well timed. We're very close to announcing the opening of our DC Fast Charge Grant Program funded under the Texas Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. So very happy to see Buzz and the other presentations kind of leading us down this road to the future of chargers and electric vehicles here. So for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, many of you have heard of the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan, or TERP, and this is something that's existed since 2001, enacted by the state legislature to help us reduce nitrogen oxides emissions and kind of curb ozone pollution in key areas of the state. Since the early 2000s, the TERP programs have just blossomed into more than 10 programs, all geared toward helping to reduce emissions, primarily from mobile sources and heavy duty, but also to help encourage the build out of light duty vehicles that run on something like electric or hydrogen or even CNG. And then of course, we also have programs that focus on stationary technologies to reduce emissions as well. So we kind of run the whole gambit now on grants for emissions reductions. In recent years, we have certainly seen increasing interest in the electric infrastructure and vehicles. Under the TERP umbrella, we have the light duty motor vehicle purchase or lease incentive program, and that's the $2,500 rebate on electric vehicles that many of you may be familiar with. And we've been able to fund or help to provide rebates for now thousands of electric vehicles through that program over recent years, and have just seen increasing interest in that area. But similarly, we've had a program called the Alternative Fueling Facilities Program, or AFFP, under TERP. And that's been one to kind of help meet, the expanding use of vehicles on alternative fuels with the infrastructure to help provide that. And as has been mentioned a couple of times, often this infrastructure is more expensive, and certainly the vehicles when they're first coming out are more expensive. And so the state of Texas has decided over the past years that as we move toward an era that these things are all price competitive, that it's in the interest of the state and certainly air quality to chip in and help provide these additional incentives to kind of push people to the edge of jumping in on these new technologies that can benefit air quality, which is what we do. And we do so many of these grants now that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality now has an entire division, my division called the Air Grants Division. And I guess so after this introduction, I'll introduce myself that I work with the TERP and the Volkswagen mitigation programs. I've been able to work in just about every level of the program development since 2015. So taking programs from statute and rule and guidelines with the commission, implementing them, working with stakeholders in the community, and really trying to build up these programs to the extent possible to reach the most people possible and to really work and function for improving air quality in the state of Texas. So I've been very happy to work throughout the various programs that we have, to the point now where I get to manage the teams that are responsible for developing, implementing, marketing and creating the contracts ultimately become our grants with the thousands of folks from the public and business communities and governmental communities that we get to work with. So that's kind of what I do, and hopefully the right person to be here today to answer questions y'all have about those programs or any others. So with that, I'd like to jump over to a couple of our web pages. As I mentioned, we're very close to opening a very large electric infrastructure program. We'll also be looking to open our TERP program soon. Where we stand now, we're closing out the state fiscal biennium, which ends on August 31st. Each fiscal year concludes on August 31st. And of course, we just had a legislative session that made some changes to our programs. So I don't have a full presentation of every program and exactly what it's going to look like just yet, but we're actively developing those, and we'll look forward to announcing what workshops and webinars to kind of go through each program as we're ready to open those. But in the meantime, as we're working toward that, our websites are an excellent resource to take a look at which programs we've historically been able to open over the 2-year fiscal biennium period, what those kind of look like, what the application forms involved with those look like, and of course, to get on those websites, sign up with your email address if you'd like to receive automatic notification. Anytime we're about to open a program, you get an email that says, hey, TERP, or hey, the Volkswagen programs are going to open, or there's going to be a webinar to explain the programs for you. Please join us and here's some instructions. So that's another great resource to sign up for. So that being said, let's see how I can try my hand at screen sharing. And it looks like I have some options. We'll jump right over to the TERP webpage first. And if someone wants to let me know if we can see the TERP webpage here.
We can see it.
Excellent. Wow, first try. That is breaking records here. Okay, so what you see here is our main TERP landing page. You can get there by typing in www.terpgrants.org. You can also do a Google or Yahoo or other search for TERP grants, Texas Emission Reduction Plan. It'll all kind of lead you to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality web pages and searches for our programs. This primary landing page here, let's see if I can minimize this. Our primary landing page here, I kind of want to point out at the very top, obviously a quick email to get to me and to our staff to answer questions. But right down here under more information, this is where you can kind of click and sign up for the email updates that I was talking about. And of course, additional contact information. For those of you who are in contact with a lot of folks who might be interested in our program, we have so many programs and there's so many different criteria that span each program that it can be very helpful for folks to refer to a video that we have produced here. It's on YouTube. That just kind of walks through very briefly, the origin of the program and what we do. It's kind of a simple introduction to what we can potentially offer. And then as folks become interested, contact us, become engaged, we can point them to specific programs that might be of most interest or benefit to them. And that's really where our grant programs tab comes into play. So a great resource to jump to if you're on the website looking for information or talking to us, and we can walk folks through that as well. As you can see here, we've got each of these programs laid out that we offer. All of these programs are currently set to be offered in the coming 2-year period ahead of us. I mentioned the alternative fueling facilities program, our light duty motor vehicle program. And I'd like to point out too, that in just about all of these TERP programs that are available, electric vehicles, be they light duty, medium or heavy duty, depending on the program, electric vehicles qualify for vehicles that we can help fund under those programs. So we certainly look forward to seeing more of the medium and heavy duty come online, even as we continue to offer rebates for those light duty vehicles that, as Buzz mentioned too, we're seeing a lot more of out there. And of course, the continued infrastructure build out through the TERP programs, offering those grants for the electric fueling infrastructure. We funded a lot of light duty, level 2 chargers recently under this alternative fueling facility program, but also under the Volkswagen environmental mitigation programs. We have a level 2 charging program that closes September 9th, as a matter of fact. I believe it's the 9th, that we have seen a lot of level 2. And it was interesting that we pointed out hotels as being a great place for those. We've seen a lot of hotels across the entire state of Texas come through the door with requests for grants for level 2 chargers at those. So for those of you traveling the great state of Texas, looking for great places to stay, we hope to be an increasing resource for helping get those to a hotel near you, as of course other places that we're seeing as well. So these are, again, the TERP grant programs as they stand now. Any one of these that you're interested in, you can click into it. it lays out basically the list of applications we've received before and what we funded, so you can get an idea of what kind of entities and folks that have been interested in the past. And then we move right into the basic steps of, are you eligible for this grant, what the project application looks like, how to submit your application. These are all still useful links, even though we will be updating all the documents and things tied to these with new criteria and things out of the legislative session. We're really going to continue to follow a very similar format in most respects of what's required for each program. So even though we don't have all the latest out just yet, with the new biennium starting in just a couple of weeks, once we're able to jump into that new biennium and develop the new programs, you'll see that a lot of the things stay very similar. So for those of you interested right now and you just can't wait, it's a great idea to just jump on and look at what our previous request for grant applications was. What, for example, our steps for submitting the application are, and where to send those so that you can be ready. And of course, ask any questions in advance of program openings. And I'll be very happy to take questions on those TURP programs as soon as y'all are ready. But very similarly, and let's see if this works, if I can jump over to it. Do we now see the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust webpage?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sometimes it locks a single page. So this looks somewhat similar to the TURP webpage. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, this is a webpage to direct to the grant programs that the state of Texas was authorized, to implement based on the funds received from the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust. Some of you may recall that there was an issue with the emissions of certain Volkswagen vehicles, and each state came to an agreement for certain funds to sort of mitigate the extra emissions that we found out were actually coming from those vehicles during the period they were in use. Texas received $209 million. We were given instruction for a variety of programs to implement with that funding. And among those are programs to help encourage the build out and use of electric vehicles. And so, as I just mentioned, we've opened, if you look at our grants tab here, again, very similar to the TURP webpage, we see the different programs we've been able to open under with these program dollars here. And under the Zero Emission Vehicle Supply Equipment Grants, you can learn more about those. We'll see if it loads. And of course, there's always got to be that one instance. So apologies for that. But when you visit on yours, depending on the browser, hopefully it works. If it doesn't, give us a call and we can help you work through that. But that webpage will take you to what we currently have, which is a level 2 program that folks can apply for grants to help incentivize building out those level 2 chargers across the state. And then very soon we'll be announcing the opening of the DC Fast Charge Grant Round, which we're very excited about. Just finalizing the criteria for that, and we will be planning to host workshop webinars about that program prior to its actual opening in the coming month. But this is going to be one of our first opportunities with the increased interest in DC Fast Charge to really, as a state, jump into that market that others have been involved and interested in for so long, and provide grants to incentivize the build out of those fast chargers across the state. Supplementing what's already out there and encouraging the further use of that equipment. And again, very excited to open that one, and we expect a lot of questions as soon as that announcement goes out soon. And we hope to see a lot of you, of course, at the webinar. So if you're curious and you don't hear anything in the coming couple of weeks about the program, make sure that y'all have my email address. You can reach out to me directly and I'll be happy to let you know where we're at on that and answer any questions that we have about that program coming up. That's a lot to take in. We have a lot of programs, and I'm very happy to kind of sit back and take your questions on what's available, what we've seen in the past, or any thoughts or comments y'all have as we move forward in the new biennium of these emissions reduction grants. And I'm just going to pull the screen back up and pause the share.
Thank you. That will also give me an opportunity to unmute myself. We did receive a question. How much of the $209 million in the VW trust is still available?
Well, I can tell you right now that we plan to go into the DC Fast Charge Grant with around $20 million. We may have some remaining as well from the level 2 that could be upwards of 5 or 10 million that could potentially go into the DC Fast Charge as well. We're still finalizing contracts after the close of some of those other programs, so I don't have that final number for you right this second, but that's certainly something that we can pulled together for folks who are interested soon. But we do expect that even after the DC fast charge round, there will be additional funds remaining. And we'll be working with the commission to see where those funds, where we'd like to put those funds, whether they go back into programs that we've already opened and we issue more grants into those, or if we find that there's an interest in putting those additional funds into something that's already open, like the DC fast charge will be open at that time. Those decisions are still to be made, but I can tell you there are remaining funds, and we do intend to utilize all of the funds that were made available to Texas for emissions reduction grants.
Great, thank you. We did also get a question if TURP can help raise awareness of Texas companies in the EV charging area. They mentioned revitalized charging solutions in Fort Worth. Is that something?
That's a little bit trickier as an agency. We want to be as neutral as possible to the various companies that are out there. We try to lower the barriers in each program for folks to enter, no matter, if they're an eligible entity, whether they're an individual, a company, or a governmental entity. So I don't know that the program is able to sponsor a specific company or push them forward, but certainly if folks in that group are interested in the grants that we have available, we're always happy to meet and discuss with folks and provide every bit of information we have available for them. But at this time, we're not actively sponsoring any specific companies over others.
Great, thank you. All right, I don't see any additional questions, and we seem to be running right on time. I am going to move forward with our next presenters, if I can get the screen to move. There we go. We have Diane Turchetta with the Federal Highway Administration and Rob Hyman with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and they will speak today on their Alternative Fuel Corridors program and funding opportunities, as well as their routes initiative, or routes, TBD.
Great. Can you all hear me? This is Diane.
Yes, we can.
Great. This is Diane Turchetta with the Federal Highway Administration. I think most of you are familiar, or the majority of you are familiar with the Alternative Fuels Corridor program that was under the FAST Act. The provisions were in the FAST Act. DOT was asked to designate alternative fuel corridors for a couple of fuels, one of those being EV charging, natural gas, propane, and hydrogen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the program and about some funding opportunities, and then turn it over to my colleague in the Office of the Secretary, Rob Hyman, who will be talking about the ROOTS program that he administers. So we can go to the next slide. So as I said, we've been implementing this program since 2016, as was mentioned before. We go out with a solicitation on an annual basis for nominations from state and locals. And this is what it looked like after 5 years of designating corridors. Now, this is all the fuel corridors. This includes all fuels, not just EVs. And if we want to just look at EVs, I can bring that up in the chat, that link. But this map indicates the orange dotted lines indicate the pending corridors for one or more alternative fuels, which means that the corridor didn't quite meet the criteria set out for a various fuel, one or more fuels. And there are some gaps in the corridor, so infrastructure needs to be filled in. And the green lines, the solid green lines, indicate that the corridor is ready. It meant criteria for one or more fuels, and that particular segment of road is eligible for highway signage. Okay, next slide. Just a little bit more information on where we are after 5 years of the program. On the left is the number of interstates and state roads, US highways that have been designated either pending or ready, and also the mileage of the national highway system. So you can see it growing over the years and us ending in round 5 with about almost 166,000 miles of the NHS being designated. Next slide. So we will get to current funding opportunities. If you all remember Earth Day, April 22nd, 2021, the White House issued some information on electric vehicle charging infrastructure, both from DOT and Department of Energy. This also was the announcement of our round 5 corridor designations. So it was announced, the corridor designations were announced, and as I said, some funding information from DOT, which we can go to the next slide. So I don't know how many of you really focused on this or saw this in that announcement or on the there's a link to this on the alternative fuel corridor website. And this is a funding report for federal highway and DOT funding for programs that have electric vehicle eligibility. And it starts out with formula programs, and you all are probably most familiar with the CMAQ program, the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Improvement Program that has funded a lot of fuel projects over the years. And there are some other formula programs there that have EV eligibility, and then they move to discretionary grant programs, which are the big dollar programs like RAISE and Infra, which in this year, under the new administration, added EV eligibilities for those dollars. And then also some innovative finance programs that also have eligibility. I think the most important thing to remember about these, especially the formula programs, are that the eligibility is there for EV infrastructure. However, that doesn't mean there's a set aside of money or there's money off the top exclusively for EV infrastructure. It means it's an eligible activity under these formula programs, along with lots of other programs. So it's totally up to your state DOT if they want to use a specific pot of that formula money on EV infrastructure. So that's the important thing to remember about this matrix. Next slide. So recently, we have an announcement from the White House, some information on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that just passed the Senate and is now awaiting action in the House. We can go to the next slide. Under that program, I don't know if any of you have looked at all 2,700 pages of the bipartisan bill, but there are provisions that carve out funding to different programs for DOT, one being funding the corridor program. The two programs total 7.5 billion. The corridor program itself addresses only EV infrastructure, and it's $5 billion, $1 billion a year to basically install DC fast chargers on corridors around the country. The second program in this bill is more of a community-based $2.5 billion program that includes all fuels, and that would be a discretionary grant program. So people would apply to that, state and locals, and it would go through an evaluation of those applications like other discretionary grant programs. So as I said, these are, and there's lots of other EV provisions in that bill, but I was just focusing here on the specific corridor and community grant program. This bill sets up a joint program office with the Department of Energy where we would all provide, especially DOE, technical assistance to grant recipients, and has a lot of relevant other provisions for EVs. So I would encourage you to, take a look, focus in on that, that particular provision. And also it includes the White House fact sheet. If you take a look, that formula program for the corridors, you could take a look. It has a kind of a state-by-state outline of what each state would be expected to receive under the formula program. So you can look at your state and get an idea of what will be received for infrastructure, EV infrastructure under the bipartisan bill. So as I said, I think everyone's in a waiting positions here to see exactly, what happens in the House, how that's handled. If you've been listening to the news, obviously complications there. So we'll see in the end what gifts we get and, what ultimately is signed off on in law. Next slide. So if you have questions, I just wanted to provide some contact information here. I think a lot of you know Mike Scarpino and Stephen Costa at the DOT Volpe Center, former DOE Clean Cities program employees who both know DOT and DOE programs, so very valuable resources to us. And just a few websites there, the Alternative Fuel Corridor website. If you're interested in highway signage, the MUTCD memorandum that specifically spells out signage for alternative fuel corridors. And of course, you are all familiar with the DOE NRAIL alternative fueling station locator. So let me hand it over to Rob, and he's going to talk a little bit about how we are working together, Federal Highway and the Office of Secretary, to promote EVs and build out the infrastructure to rural areas.
Thank you, Diane. So Diane and I have actually worked together for many, many years. I used to be at Federal Highway on the same team as Diane. I'm in the Office of the Secretary now, where I lead what's called the Rural Opportunities to Use Transportation for Economic Success Initiative, or the ROOTS initiative. Routes or routes, it's fine either way. I think it mostly depends on where you grew up. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit in the context of electric vehicles. Just first to give you a little background and context on the ROOTS initiative, it's basically focused on helping rural stakeholders access DOT funding and DOT financing and DOT resources. We're aware that many smaller rural governments just don't have the same resources to devote to the federal system, to understanding DOT grants, how to apply for them, how to access all the resources we have to offer. And so this initiative is really devoted to making sure that folks can equally access what we have to offer. We kind of, very generically, we have sort of three very main areas of activity. We have listening sessions, other ways of engaging with stakeholders to get feedback on what rural needs are. We do a lot of work with data, analyzing trends, both in terms of rural transportation, but also in terms of the department and what our grant programs are doing in respect to rural communities. But then the last area is really the main area, and that's providing information and technical assistance to help rural stakeholders in understanding the DOT system of grants and resources. So we've got all kinds of information on our website. We have this grant applicant toolkit, which is basically a summary of the 50-odd discretionary grant programs that DOT has. We have web pages showing our active funding and financing opportunities across the department that are relevant for rural stakeholders. We do webinars. So there's lots of good information. You can subscribe to our listserv, and you can, of course, visit our website. If we go to the next slide. But of course, what I'm here to talk about today is electric vehicles in rural areas. And I have to say the presentations that preceded us were really fantastic and hit on all the things that we've been thinking about as well. So earlier this year, we started thinking about this topic. Obviously rural areas both lag in terms of the number of electric vehicles and also the electric vehicle infrastructure. And so our thought was, what can we do to help out with that? And similar to the toolkit we put out last year, we wanted to provide some good information to rural stakeholders on how you can plan and fund and implement EV charger networks. So we are in the midst of developing a rural EV infrastructure toolkit. It'll come out in fall. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And the idea is to, for rural stakeholders who may not have much knowledge on it, to highlight the benefits of EVs in rural areas in terms of the cost savings, the economic development opportunities that a lot of the previous speakers talked about so well, kind of future-proofing the transportation network in rural areas. We're probably going to put in some kind of decision tree that'll help project sponsors kind of understand their eligibility for the different funding programs, not just at DOT, but also across the federal government. We're trying to make this a real one-stop shop for information. We're putting information in on funding sources that are particularly applicable to rural areas like USDA, which is extremely rural focused, and then some technical advice on planning and implementation. Next slide, please. This gives you just a little bit of a sense of what the toolkit's going to have in it. This table of contents, we keep shifting things around. I mentioned previously a lot of the things we're going to focus on. We're also going to talk about partnership opportunities to help folks understand who they might be working with, utilities, whoever. This toolkit is meant to be not just for government decision makers, but also for businesses, sort of getting at that idea of if you're a hotel or if you're a restaurant and you're thinking about this and you're trying to understand what your opportunities are. We kind of want to walk through, your various funding opportunities and the sort of decisions you might need to make in the process. In terms of the project schedule, our plan is to get an initial toolkit out this fall. We really want information out there as soon as we can. But then after that, we want to go into kind of a workshopping phase and talk with stakeholders around the country about the toolkit and identify gaps and what does the toolkit need, and then release a revised version in the spring of 2022 that we hope will have even more useful information. We'll address what folks think is needed, and we'll also address the hopefully new legislation coming out, because that probably won't be, there won't be enough information about it for that fall 2021 release. And so we know the landscape is changing, and we want to make sure the information in there is up to date and in good shape. If you go to the next slide, please. So that's basically what I had to talk about. This is our website. We don't have information on the toolkit up there yet. We will probably start putting up some EV related information soon. You can email us at that email in the center right as well. And as I said, if you go to that homepage, you can sign up onto our email list. That's pretty much all I had to say. I did want to just say a little bit more about that workshopping phase next winter. So, you know, as folks think about it, if you're interested in participating in that, we're very much looking for folks who want to kind of take the toolkit for a test drive, tell us what they need, tell us what it does and does not do for them. So if there are folks on this call who are interested, please do send an email. We would very much like to have good contacts for this. And that's about it.
Great, thank you. We did have a question, which I think you kind of touched on, but what is the ideal environment use case for rural use EVs?
Sure. So I mean, I guess that kind of touches on a bunch of different topics and issues. You know, from our point of view, we see there being a lot of benefits that EVs can bring to rural areas in terms of cost savings because of the lower fuel and maintenance costs over the lifetime of it. In terms of the economic benefits, clearly for communities that are on major through corridors, there could be lots of potential to attract EV drivers off the corridor to rural attractions. You know, it's interesting when you look at VMT statistics, what you'll find is that rural areas account for only about 20% of the US population, but actually about 44% of VMT occurs in rural areas. And it's in part due to the large number of urban drivers who are, you know, traveling through or to rural areas as their destinations. So there's certainly a lot of potential along corridors to attract those drivers off to go to rural destinations. There's also in gateway communities, you know, towns that are at the gateways to national parks or other rural attractions. Again, there's huge opportunities there to bring in EV drivers from outside the community to, you know, take advantage of your attractions. So those are kind of the sorts of things that we think about. We do recognize the complications in terms of grid infrastructure, and you know that can be a problem in a lot of rural communities. So clearly, ones who have more robust grid infrastructure are in better shape for it. But as was talked about in some of the previous presentations, there are options. Even if you don't have three-phase power, there are options to do these kind of trickle charge chargers into a battery system or perhaps solar powered chargers that can get you even fast charging in rural areas. But we do also see a lot of opportunities for level 2 charging in rural areas. You know, those overnight instances are great, hotels and whatnot, but I think even at things like restaurants, you know, there are times when people will want to stop for just a few hours and perhaps they're not on a 400-mile trip, but they've driven out from the city and they would like to be able to charge for a few hours while they do some things at the rural attraction before they head back to their homes. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but those are the kinds of things we think about. And if there's something specific you have in mind, feel free to put that in the chat pod as well.
Great, thank you. There was a question of whether the plans discuss replacement schedules for the infrastructure and who and how that's funded. So I think even thinking further ahead in the future of how these will be maintained.
That's something that we can think about for our toolkit, and that's a great idea. And then I don't know, Diane, if you also have thoughts on that as from an alt-field corridor perspective.
Yeah, I think that's something that we really need to think about. And as legislation rolls out and as we write program guidance from the national perspective, that's something that probably will be addressed in that program guidance. But right now, As you all know, the landscape's changing every day, but this is something we need to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will add to that to say that, I mean, I guess, typically with the kind of programs we're used to at DOT, capital is the kind of thing that is funded. So, I mean, I expect I expect that these funds will be available for replacement of infrastructure. But again, as Diane said, it's all up in the air right now.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions at this time. So I was going to have Lori, Clark, and myself jump over real quick to kind of wrap up some of the resources that we've discussed and kind of highlight those again to get you started if you are interested in learning more about adopting EV charging infrastructure. These slides were shared prior to the presentation. I will be sending them out again afterwards. But we do want to highlight to you that we have these links in here to different resources, including on the Alternative Fuel Data Center Electric Vehicle Charger Selection Guide. So to help you with the decision-making process on what kinds of electric vehicle charging station to consider, as well as resources on procurement and even the vehicles themselves. We do also want to highlight that we do have the NCTCOG AQ funding website that we maintain with funding opportunities both at the local, state, and federal level. Lori dropped a link to that in our chat, and it's also linked here as well. I do also want to encourage everyone to sign up for the DFW Clean Cities mailing list and listserv. We do have resources available on our website, dfwcleancities.org, as well as links to events such as this one, other webinars that we've hosted, and recordings to past presentations and where we'll share slides. Now, Lori, I was going to talk real quick or speak on some of the funding and assistance through the state energy conservation.
Yeah, I just want to, we know that we're talking to you about, the idea of adding electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which uses electricity. And some of you may have concerns about, well, is this adding to my utility bill? It, in general, does not add all that much. Although if you were to have a very successful publicly accessible site, perhaps it could add up. Or are you looking at any sort of constraints in terms of electrical capacity that comes to your site? So just wanted to throw out as kind of a related idea that there are programs available across the state of Texas to help reduce electricity consumption through energy efficiency projects. So if you're a local government and you have properties, you can get a free preliminary energy assessment through the State Energy Conservation Office. They have a contractor, Jacobs Engineering, who does come and do that preliminary energy assessment, identifies kind of the low-hanging fruit where you can get some good energy savings, which then can, you reduce here so that you can add the load from the electric vehicles and kind of come out as a wash. It's kind of the concept. And then they, for those retrofits or efficiency measures that they identify that you actually want to pursue, SECO does have a Lone Star loan program. It's open enrollment through the end of this month. These are very low interest loans, usually like 1%, 2%. So those are opportunities available to local government properties. For commercial properties, I know we have some commercial properties represented on the call today, which is very exciting. We're so glad you're here. There is a program called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, that can be used to finance energy and water conservation improvements on commercial and industrial properties, and also multifamily. Multifamily, I believe, for this program is defined as 5 or more units. So the way it works is the capital cost of the improvements get turned into kind of you're choosing to attach an extra lien onto the property so that if you sell in 5 years, the remaining payments are going to transfer to the new owner. And so it can reduce some of the barriers, you know, if you're looking at, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be in this property for 20 years, and this is a big HVAC improvement that has a 20-year payback. And sometimes that can be a deterrent to getting those projects done. So PACE financing can help with that. The State Energy Conservation Office, so all of these links go to State Energy Conservation Office web pages, but there's also a nice web page from Houston Advanced Research Center that tracks some of the projects, where they've been, what kind of energy and water savings they've achieved. So this financing program is available in parts of the state where a PACE district has been set up. So local governments have a role to play here in creating a PACE district. And only when a local government creates that PACE district can the commercial and industrial properties take advantage. So you can look at these sites and see if your county or city has a PACE district already. If it does not, you may want to talk to them about that. If you're a private property owner, to encourage them to consider that. And we have other resources at our offices on PACE financing and on energy efficiency in general. I'll actually drop a link. There's a website, conservenorthtexas.org, that we maintain with a lot of those types of resources. So just wanted to throw that out as you know, the other half of some of these projects that you may want to consider and keep in mind.
Thank you. We also wanted to call to your attention here as we'd shown on some of our maps and other screens, but a link to where to find charging stations so that you can see where the nearest chargers are in your community, as well as the types. You'll also be able to pull up the fuel corridors and see if your community falls on one of the alternative fuel corridors that were designated under the FAST Act. And then moving along, if during this presentation you did decide, well, maybe I do want to install some EV infrastructure at my property. We've kind of outlined here some steps that we recommend taking that on the forefront if you are considering installing EV. As you've kind of heard us mention a few times, the first step being to engage with your utility. This is where you'll kind of be able to price out and see what the cost would be for developing a charging infrastructure site on your property. And we also recommend emailing us at cleancities@nctcog.org. We can help you find the best EV contact for your utility service area. As we mentioned, you know, most of our transmission distribution provider in our region is Encore, who has joined us on today's call. And so once you are able to reach out to your service provider and ensure you have adequate electricity, the next step would be to determine the funding and installation operation costs. So deciding what are the primary cost factors, including installation, but also things to consider are permitting, as well as adequate building, wiring, electrical capacity, and any other construction requirements, since those can stall a project, and you want to make sure that you're aware of them before moving forward on installing infrastructure. So there's always funding. There are several funding opportunities available which you can find on our website, nctcog.org/AQ funding that we had mentioned on previous slides. And then if you do make it to the step where you are ready to install an EV charging site, make sure that it's visible and that you're giving the site the best opportunity to draw EV travelers, and that it's maximize usage at the site. So we recommend things like signage so that people are able to be aware that it is an EV parking and charging station. So things like even as simple as painting the parking lot. And there's also things as safety considerations, so making sure there's adequate lighting and that you provide accessibility to people based on compliance with the ADA. Lastly, you want to make sure that everyone can find your charging station using all the tools and locators that we mentioned. So you can add station data directly to the AFDC station locator, or you can email us at cleancities@nctcog.org, and we can add that so that EV users are aware of your station. And so as Nate had mentioned previously, there is the Texas Volkswagen funding currently out right now for level 2 charger rebates. This is open until September 9th, 2021. So coming up in the next few weeks, or when if funds run out, whichever is first. It is a first come, first served basis. As you can see, and as Nate mentioned in his presentations, there's been thousands of funding sites that are sites that have been requested for funding statewide. As you can see, a large portion of this are in public locations, but workplaces and multi-unit dwellings are eligible to apply as well. The remaining funding is over $6 million. And so, as mentioned, get your application in before September 9th. We do have this data as provided as of August 2nd, 2021. And DFW area, we have requested 27% of all funds to date. And so, as mentioned, the deadline's coming to apply. So if you are interested in level 2 charging, as mentioned, these are great for hotels, long sit restaurants where people may choose to dine. And so moving to our last slide, just wanted to show that in relation to the funding requests that have come through for the Texas Volkswagen environmental mitigation grant program for the level 2 funding, the level 2 charger funding for chargers, that they've actually received applications from 138 out of 254 counties statewide. As you can see, they've identified priority areas based on an air quality non-attainment areas. So this includes the following counties in DFW, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso, Bell, and the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. And so with that said, if you have any questions on the information that's been provided today, please feel free to reach out to Bethany Ross, myself, or Lori Clark. You can join today to become a DFW Clean Cities member. If you have your phone ready, you can pull out your camera to pull up the QR code to join our membership, as well as sending a text to 22828 to join our mailing list. And so at this time, we would like to give everyone the opportunity to turn on your cameras and unmute yourself if you would like to, and I will stop sharing my screen. There we go. So we wanted to save this time to allow everyone to have kind of a more informal discussion. Thank you for everyone who's been typing their questions into the chat or has introduced themselves. Again, for today's webinar, we did cast a wide net of audiences throughout the wide net of communities throughout Texas. We would love to know why you were interested in joining today. If there's any questions that we can answer. It would also kind of, if we have this discussion, to also know everyone's background. So if you don't mind saying what department or what position you represent, as well as the community.
One more thing, because I know people are starting to drop off, in case you don't want to stay for the open discussion, please note Bethany put a link to a short 5-minute feedback survey into the chat box. We really would like to get feedback from everybody about how today's webinar was informative, but also other topics that you may want to see us put together a program for, to help with, whether it's electric vehicles or any other thing related to air quality or alternative fuels. Feel free to think big.
Yes. And I will also mention again that after this presentation, we will be sending out the slides again and a link to the survey that Bethany had provided. I do see a question come in from Ellis County. So as a county judge in Ellis County, we are looking at ways to be on the cutting edge and providing a better quality of life here. I can be a resource to our city partners. Thank you. So that's Mr. Todd Little. If we have any communities that are on the line from Ellis County, raise your hand.
Right, Lori, this is Prit Patel, and I work in economic development at the COG, and I do see a lot of our economic development partners that were on the call this afternoon, and obviously there's a strong economic benefit and economic development and resiliency benefit. So I think for those folks that we shared this opportunity with, that's probably their main reason for attending this. And this was really, really great. Thank you.
Thank you for your collaboration and sending things out. And thank you so much, Judge Little, for your comment. Really appreciate that. I will highlight, since we have been talking quite a bit about rural areas, that as you travel south out of our urban core, the infrastructure availability for electric vehicles does start to fall apart a little bit, as you go south and as you go east. So additional infrastructure in Ellis County is definitely, if we as staff were to put together kind of a priority list, I think Ellis County is up on that priority list. Also going east through Kaufman, and even extending beyond our eastern boundary into Van Zandt and some of the other counties traveling towards Shreveport, as Buzz pointed out. So yes, really, really appreciate your leadership and your kind of standard setting. So if there's anything specific that we can do to help you out, please don't hesitate to let us know. Other comments, questions, ideas? Is there some?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, go.
Wasn't sure if I need to raise hands or whatnot, but it's been a while. Hi, my name's
Hi.
Bishop. I'm here with the city of Sugar Land. And so we're interested in a lot of data and trying to get feedback from our residents and whatnot. And so I was wondering, have you guys received any feedback, or how is that kind of information gathered about the introduction of these level 2 or the DC charging stations? How does that kind of work?
So since we're a council government, we don't have the strongest connection directly to the residents in our area. We really work through our cities. So if there's any other cities from the Dallas-Fort Worth area on the line who want to speak to that, we'd welcome that. I will say that there are some sample surveys that have been put together for workplace charging in particular that I think could be tweaked relatively easily to just kind of do a general community survey. And the workplace charging would be for an employer to send out to all their staff, how many of you drive an EV, how, what's your commute, how long would you want to be able to plug in? And part of the issue is being able to balance demand when you're an employer. Mm-hmm. And so we can certainly provide a copy of that as an example. I can also share that the City of Dallas and our region sent out a communication to all of the multifamily properties within the city. They had a list of all of the property management companies that they had because of some other efforts that they had done related to solid waste and recycling, and pushed out some information about these level 2 charging stations to those multifamily properties. And that resulted in several inquiries that came back to us from property owners that were like, hey, I want to learn more about that. So there may be some things that you could consider doing as the city, just sending the word out to major employers, sending the word out to some of the property owners who can at their kind of hyper local level with their residents or their staff. Those are just a couple ideas, but certainly we can send you some examples of some things.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Diane, for being here this morning.
Yes, thank you. If we don't have any other questions at this time, I can pull up a couple of web pages just to show this is the TCQ, Texas Volkswagen Emission Mitigation Program, to the link to the level 2 charging stations, the grant for the level 2 charging stations. As mentioned, this is available until September 9th, so that is coming up. As Nate mentioned, there are the requests for grant applications and other forms to be filled out. The other item I was going to share was the link directly to our DFW Clean Cities website. For some of you who may not be familiar with DFW Clean Cities, we did a recent revamp of our website, so it might look a little different than what you've seen in the past. As mentioned, we do have resources on here relating to our meetings, and this is the link to where the recording for today's webinar will be posted. We also have coming up an electric utility and local government EV working group workshop on August 27th, as well as we'll be having our fleet recognition awards. I think some of our fleets on the call today may be recognized at our event tomorrow. This is for the DFW area fleets that submitted their annual survey to us. And we will have presentations from TCQ, as well as discussing things like our try and drive program. And again, if you want to stay into the loop, please do check out our website for things like resources on how to find alt fuel stations, as well as finding alt fuel vehicles. We do have an annual report that we obtain yearly from data that fleets submit to us here in DFW that tracks the number of gallons of petroleum reduced over the course of these fleets submitting the reports and adopting our clean fleet policy. And then just also wanted to call attention to some of our initiatives that we have, including Engine Off North Texas, which is a regional program to reduce idling. We do have some informational materials available for communities if you want to get some materials on anti-idling and signage.
I could flag going back to the questions about collecting data and getting information on demand. So I did drop into the chat. We do have 2 websites that are specific to, one is specific to trying to consolidate a short list of resources for workplaces. And then one is kind of the companion website for multifamily properties. So I put both of those links in the chat and we can include that in the follow-up, but that's where you can get like the sample survey for employers to use with their staff that you could perhaps modify for just kind of a citizen survey. We do have data on registration, electric vehicle registration. Now it recently came to our attention that I think our data on the electric vehicle registration is relatively complete. There may be more of a gap than what we had realized in the rest of the vehicle registration. So we're working on that. But we do have data for the entire state. We buy registration data from the Department of Motor Vehicles, and then the team does some magic with it. And we have breakdowns of how many electric vehicles are registered by city, by county, by zip code. We are working on census tract. That's not ready quite yet, but it's something we're working on, and can provide that to any city around the state that would like a copy. We post it once a month. So it's available for download, and you can see exactly how much is in your area. So Sugar Land, we will go ahead and assume that that would be of interest to you. So we'll get that sent over. And hopefully that's a piece of information that's helpful. And then the alternative fueling station locator that's Raya highlighted is a good place to see the universe of stations that's available. There's also an app called PlugShare that a lot of EV drivers use. And you can check and see, are there already you know, a dozen EV charging stations in the city of Sugar Land or in the city of whatever, then maybe you're in decent shape. But if there's not, then you know that perhaps there's a need that is not yet met.
Yes, and any other community on the line, if you are, you know, if you feel spoken to by this webinar, then please feel free to reach out to us directly afterwards. We're happy to provide, like Lori mentioned, more customized information, more specific to your area. So without hearing any more questions at this time, I was going to suggest we end the webinar a little bit early. I really appreciate everyone for joining us and staying on for an hour and a half. Please, again, do take the survey to just give us some more feedback on things that you would like for information to be presented in future webinars, things that we didn't cover in this one that you would like to learn more about. Please also take time to share how you heard about today's webinar. So we want to make sure that we're getting our message out to the right audience. And if you please feel free, we will send out the presentation slides as well as the recording after today. But please feel free to invite others to watch today's webinar or join the DFW Clean Cities mailing list. We hope that you can attend more of our events and presentations in the future. So thank you, and we hope you have a great day. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was awesome.
Great, as always.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.